you mentioned a little while ago, and I did too, the national conversation. We were kind of hinting at John Harbaugh's hot seat. And the guys on First Things First, led by Nick Wright, had a discussion that you just picked up right prior to coming on live, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically like talking about Ravens odds. But what we're going to take a look at is coming off an AFC Championship appearance. Uh, is it too early to actually label John Harbaugh as on the hot seat? I know I said that yesterday. I think I said something along the lines yesterday of, should they not get to where they want to go after this year, I
Mm-hmm.
think it gets very hot. But to refer to him as being on the hot seat right now, I think would be inaccurate.
All right. Well, let's let's hear the clip, and then I'll give my take on that after we hear what they have to say.
Yep.
Gotten one of the reasons John Harbaugh, and it was now 6 years ago, but switched from Flacco to Lamar mid-season was because he was going to get fired. That was like a save my job, pull this parachute type of thing. Now Flacco got
Flacco can still play.
Evidently, Flacco got hurt, and they put Lamar in, but then they stuck with him. People at that time was like, man, haven't won a playoff game. I think they had won one playoff game since the Super Bowl. There was a lot of like, did we peak years ago and have just been on the downslope? And then since then with Lamar, they've had this massive success. I think right now is an odd moment to say he's on the hot seat because they're coming off playoffs and regular season, but playoffs as well, their best year since the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They won a playoff game. They had the bye. They made it to the conference championship game. So I don't look at John Harbaugh on the hot seat. What I do think is the reason I said the Tomlin thing is those are two coaches, same division and, bitter rivals as it happens, who had massive success almost immediately upon taking over as the head coach. And then since then have had no real, for Tomlin, 0, and for the Ravens, close to 0, like awful years, but not the consistent championship contender that we got used to early in their.
Well, I felt like it was intellectually unfair of sports media to say Dak is 2-5, maybe it's time to move on. That is not a hot take at all in the playoffs. It's like maybe it's time the Cowboys move on. It's not going to happen. You got to start fresh, almost like the Kirk Cousins Vikings scenario. And Harbaugh's 3-6, one more win, one more loss, and it feels almost taboo to say like, should you think about moving on?
Well, but
What was your reaction to that clip, Sarah?
Two things. First of all, the phrase Super Bowl or bust. I agree with them. You can't say it's a Super Bowl or bust year if something isn't busted, meaning something has to change. That's to me what Super Bowl or bust means. The pipes are busted, right? Something has to change. Something has to be fixed.
Oh, meaning like roster construction, coaching personnel, like
Correct.
that type of thing.
That, like, otherwise the term has no meaning. Like, what's the meaning behind Super Bowl or bust if nothing changes? So my question to you first is, do you view this year as a Super Bowl or bust situation?
So the way you just defined it
Yeah.
is different than what I was envisioning. But it makes a lot of sense where you're going with that. I looked at it as, and maybe this isn't the specific label Super Bowl or bust, but I just view from this point forward with Lamar, with the new system, with the investments around him, with the stellar defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I view anything short of a Super Bowl as a disappointment, as I mentioned yesterday.
Right.
Is that the same thing in your mind as Super Bowl or bust?
No, then that's not a Super Bowl or bust year. That's a Super Bowl or disappointment year.
Right.
That's a Super Bowl and then run it back year.
Right.
Because we're so close. That to me is Super Bowl or we'll run it back again.
Right.
Because listen, of course there's going to be changes, right? There's always roster turnover. But bust means that something big is happening in my mind.
Okay. And if that's the case, which it is.
Right.
Then gosh, no, because I don't want them to tear down what they've built over the last year, because I think they were inches away from going to play for a Super Bowl.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If they had another say similar thing against in the AFC Championship, where it's clearly the coaches got outcoached, which is clearly what happened. That doesn't mean that like Zay didn't have the fumble or Lamar didn't have the interception or that maybe some calls could have gone their way, maybe the referees, maybe, you know what I mean? On and on and on and on.
Yeah.
But number one problem was the game plan.
Okay.
So if it was on the coaches again, you're still okay running it back.
No, if it's on the coaches in back-to-back seasons, it's time to move on from Harbaugh.
Okay. Now I agree. If you got a good, listen, if the Ravens went to the AFC Championship game and then maybe even the Super Bowl, and this is a tight battle, right? And it's going back and forth, and it's decided by what, less than a touchdown, and maybe there's and maybe there was like a fumble, or there was like late in the game that was totally not on Harbaugh or the coaches or whatever. Then I could say, all right, well, how do you put that on Harbaugh? You know what I mean?
Run it back.
How do you? Yeah, you got to run it back. Okay. So if you don't, unless you're willing to say something's busting, then it's not a Super Bowl or bust year. Okay. That's number one. Number two, as much as John Harbaugh went to bat for Lamar the other day, and we all loved it, right? Because we love it when somebody comes to bat for Lamar Jackson. What he did is he opened himself up big time.
Definitely.
Because if you're going to say that Lamar Jackson, the vision is for Lamar Jackson to not just win the Super Bowl, but to be the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL. And if you believe that, and Steve Bisciotti, more importantly, believes that, if Steve Bisciotti believes that's true, and then in 7 years, because he's going into his 7th year, right?
Lamar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's going into his 7th year. So if through 7 years, you're saying that you have on your roster who has the potential to be the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL, and in 7 years he hasn't, then that means either you're not telling the truth, or it means the organization is holding him back. Because the greatest quarterback of all time should be winning Super Bowls. So that's why I think he put himself in the crosshairs, and maybe he knows that. Yeah. A lot of people, I've seen this, it's not even just in the NFL. How about in your everyday work environment? Are there people at work that you have coworkers with, and you're both competing all the time, and you want the next promotion, so you will never say something good about the other person, right? And so there's a part of me that likes that he did that. It's like, listen, he's supposed to be the greatest of all time. Opens himself up a little bit then. Put yourself out there,
That quote will be displayed on September 5th on Thursday Night Football. That quote, you can guarantee, will be displayed for months to come, including on that Thursday night game, September 5th, Ravens-Chiefs, when whoever's broadcasting that game is just kind of like reviewing through the offseason. I can see that being a small little piece that comes across our screens on that Thursday night game. That's not going away.
Right.
And to your point, Harbs may be leaning into that. He may be very well aware and a step ahead of everybody in terms of acknowledging what he's just done.
Right.
And if that's the case, that's honorable.
Totally.
But just know.
Totally.
Just know that's not going any way. It's like not going away.
It's not going away, and it's like what Zay just did. Zay put it out there. I want more deep balls. Yes. Now, I mean, that's a lot easier to say than, I'm going to be the greatest of all time.
For sure.
But I will say this about this segment, okay? I think it's the appropriate question. Should he be on the hot seat? The only person that's truly going to answer that is Steve Bisciotti.
Yeah.
But I think it's the appropriate question, because whether Lamar Jackson becomes the greatest quarterback of all time, I don't know. But do I think that he can win Super Bowls? Absolutely. And so it's up to Steve Bisciotti to decide. Listen, we've said this before. We just had Mark Schlereth on the show. The most important person on a team, even ahead of the head coach, in terms of having impact on wins and losses, is the quarterback.
Yeah.
Right? And Bisciotti has said many times, like this, the league is split up into two different groups. The teams that have a quarterback and the teams that are searching for a quarterback.
Yeah.
That's it. He knows that. And so at the end of the day, once he sees all the results, and he said this many times, look, I'm not going to put my head coach in a lame duck year. He's not going to say either you do this or you're gone. That's no way to run business. He's said that before. But he'll have to, at the end, decide once he has the information, like we just talked about. Say, like, you make it to the Super Bowl or the AFC Championship and you lose. Is it because your coaching staff again, or was it because it was close and like the ball it just didn't go your way? And so he's the one who's going to have to answer that. But I do think, given this playoff record since 2013, it's the appropriate question, because you'll notice, Bobby, what's his name? Kevin Wildes? We didn't play the whole clip, but when he was setting it up, I don't know if you saw this when you were grabbing the clip. When he was setting up the question, he was very hesitant. And he goes, I don't even want to say it. And he goes, so I'm just going to put all the information out there. And then he goes, Nick, I hope you'll say it for me. Meaning he didn't want to ask the question of, is John Harbaugh on the hot seat? And I think that's wrong. I love John Harbaugh. I love his family. But when I was at work at the Ravens, my work was always being looked at, and I got feedback. I got feedback from coaches to scouts to everybody. And if I messed up, I heard about it, as it should be.
Didn't the owner send feedback your way one time?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Not just on Late for Work, but when I started doing TV over there. Steve Bisciotti said I yelled too much. Have I learned my lesson yet? Obviously not. But he said I got too loud on the shows.
That is so good.
But that was he was trying to help me be better. Like he was like trying to make it. And so I get too passionate sometimes. But yeah, so my work was constantly had feedback, right? And it's results based. And if somebody came along and did something better at my job, then that part of my job was given to them. That's the way it's done. No man is above criticism. And the way Kevin Wildes came at it, he was like scared to even put the question out there. So while I'm not going to go as far as say, like, if the Ravens don't win a Super Bowl, John Harbaugh should be fired. I want to see what happens this season first. But I do think it's an appropriate question. There's sometimes people that will ask questions, Bobby. Have you seen this? They ask questions where it's like, man, why are you even bringing this up? Like, we're not even in the vicinity of this, right? And then they'll feign surprise, like, what? I didn't say that this is going to happen. I'm just asking the question. It's like, yeah, but you're putting it out there, and it shouldn't even be put out there, right? This is not one of those cases.
This is not one of those.
This is not one of those cases. When you have 3 Super Bowl wins or 3 playoff wins in 12 years, then it's an appropriate question. It's okay to ask it. So I will say that the answer to the question, I will wait until after the year. But right now, I think it's the appropriate question.
I think that's fair, and I totally agree with you. And when it's asked, there's no need to shy away. There's no need to like hide or feel upset to ask it. No, say it with your chest because it's relevant. And that's where we're at right now. And of course, we continue to talk about patience, and history allows us to, I guess, honor patience. Spencer Schultz put this tweet together quickly, and then we'll move on to the next topic. That Steve Young was 33 when he won his first Super Bowl. Peyton Manning was 30. Kurt Warner was 28. Brett Favre was 27. A-Rod, Aaron Rodgers was 27. Lamar is currently 27. He'll turn 28 in January. Peyton Manning won in his 9th season. Steve Young won in his 9th. He goes from age now to amount of service time. So Peyton was in his 9th season when he won it. Steve was in his 4th as a starter. I'm sorry, in his 9th season, which was his 4th as a starter. Aaron was in his 6th, 3rd as a starter before, obviously after Brett left. And then Favre was in his 6th season, which was his 5th as a starter. And now Lamar, as Spencer noted, is going into his 7th season, but his 6th as a full-time starter. Yeah. So there you have it.
Right. And that's all fair. That's all very, very fair.
Yeah.
I think he was responding to a clip from Stephen A. there.
Yeah.
Which he was talking about what he was responding to Harbaugh, which is that Lamar will be the greatest in the history of the National Football League. And right now that's Tom Brady and it's Patrick Mahomes who's threatening. So they all started earlier.
Yep,
So like for sure Lamar can still win Super Bowls and for sure will be a Hall of Famer. But the reason why they were talking about it was because, well, to become the greatest ever, it would have been easier to start earlier. It's still possible, but he's going to have to go on a heck of a run that is almost like has never been seen.
Yeah,
You know?
no
Yeah.
question. So
Yeah.